Hey guys, we're going to go over the Persian Wars really quick. The other one, mythology, is up already as well. So make sure you pay attention, and if you missed anything from the notes, you get them down somehow in your Google Documents or on your piece of paper. This, again, is how we set up everything. We have half and half, even though this one's supposed to be a little smaller, but notes go in the right side. Anything I ask you to draw and stuff like that, you can put in the left side. There's our essential questions. How did the Persian Wars start? And the name, date, and period. This is not the title, but I'll show you the title in a bit. This is the instructions. Anything in yellow, make sure you abbreviate, you shorten and make your own words. Anything in red, you should copy out exactly, and anything in green, you do not have to write down whatsoever. There's your title, Warfare in Ancient Greece. We're going to talk about the Persian Wars first, and then move on from there. So this was a little introduction. I asked you to look at the map, and I asked you why the ancient Greeks had a very strong navy, or why they needed it. And if you didn't know what a navy is, it's on the bottom. It's military that battles in the water. And the answer was there's water all around them, as you can see. As a peninsula, that would make it true. And they would need a strong navy because they would mostly be fighting, on the water. So, yeah. A little bit of background information. Warfare was nothing new in Greece, in ancient Greece. They had the city-states who were battling for farmland and resources like silver or metals or something like that in the mountains. So they were fighting constantly. But we're going to talk about three major wars that happened in the 400s BCE. Two of them are the same people, and we're going to talk about them today. And the other one we're going to talk about a little later. It is the Peloponnesian War. But today we're going to focus on the Persian Wars. So a little bit of information about how the Greeks fought, what they used, things like that. And you can click. Well, you obviously on the video you can't click it, but if you did go back to the notes, you would be able to click, and I'll click it for you guys. Well, actually, I can't. That's what it looks like, though, on the bottom. It has a bunch of stuff about the armor and the helmet and all that. But their armor was mostly made out of bronze, leather, cloth, as you can see right there. But more importantly, how did they fight? Well, they had a battle formation called a phalanx. And a phalanx basically is a square, right? There's people lined up in lines, and it's in the square / rectangle. And they would use this phalanx, kind of organize themselves, as opposed to everybody else who wasn't really organized. They were just kind of in line, and that was it. Really long lines as opposed to squares, rectangles like the Greeks. And so they were more organized. Secondly, they had longer spears, which means if they marched on you, they would stab you with the spears before you could actually get close enough to do anything with them. So very good strategy that worked very, very well. And they also had a great sea skills, but not so great land. So the phalanx helped with the land, and then they had a great navy. So I asked you to draw a Greek warrior, and then this is the bottom half. You can see the little shin guards and the sandals, and this helmet here. This is what they look like, this little mohawk thing there. But the Greek soldiers were called hoplites. They were usually rich people because they had to provide their own weapons and armor and anything like that because the army would not, or navy, would not give them anything. So the only people that could really join the army were rich people, not farmers or merchants or anything like that. Literally just rich politicians that had money that could train and all that kind of stuff. Each hoplite, remember that's a Greek soldier, had a different color looking helmet like this over here in the corner, and the little mohawk thing, because they wanted to look bigger and scarier to the enemy. Now, this usually worked with the tribes and city-states and things like that, but bigger enemies like Persia or anybody else really didn't work very well, but it made them kind of interesting looking. So there you go. This is what they used on the sea, though. This was their really good navy. So the Greeks used what we call triremes, and you can see one pictured right there. A trireme is a boat where they had a sailboat, but they also had rowers, as you can see on the bottom. You can see the rowboat things. And I would be able to click there and show you, but it won't actually record when I get to it, so I'm not going to do it. But you can just Google triremes and you can find them. What they did is they would have a person on the top on a chair, and they would tell them where to go, where to steer, and things like that, where the rowers to steer. And they would use the front of the boat, which had this like ramming stick mechanism thing, and they would ram into the other boats and sink them. And it was very, very good because they were able to steer really, really quick because they're really small boats. And they were able to, travel really, really fast. So they did have an eyeball on them, as you can see. I have this picture right here in the front. That's for luck. The eye in Greek history / mythology is just for luck. And so they painted it on the front next to, you can see the little ramming thing here on the front. So pretty good strategy. Other places had bigger boats, so it was pretty good for them to do that. Then I asked you to draw a trireme, and now we're going to get into the Persians. So Persian War is obviously Greece versus Persia. So we talked just how Greece fought. Let's talk about how the Persians fought. So you can see on this map that all the stuff in the orange is the Persian Empire. And that little purple diamond thing is Greece. So you can see how much larger the Persian Empire was. And they didn't get here overnight, obviously. They were first nomadic tribes, and if you remember, nomadic is going from place to place in search of, food, water, whatever. In this case, probably water, because they live in the desert. But then they had different leaders, like Cyrus the Great, Darius the First, all of those guys who made it better and expanded into an empire that you could see right there. So they did very well, but they started off very much not an empire. They were just random tribes, and then a leader was like, hey, let's get together, and that's how it started. And that guy's name was Cyrus the Great. Now, for their army, they were very successful under Cyrus. Cyrus is the one that built the empire and united everybody and all that kind of stuff. But he wouldn't have gotten there without the army. They were very loyal. They were very organized and trained very well. At the very heart of the army were called the Immortals. If you've ever seen the movie 300, the Immortals are the silver-faced masked person on the cliffs and stuff shooting arrows at the Greeks. The Immortals were specifically chosen for archery skills and their bravery. So they were very good archers. They could hit you from very far away with the bow that they had. And then they also had a cavalry. Cavalry was the soldiers that rode horses into battle with bows and arrows, swords, all that kind of stuff. And basically, the Immortals shot the arrows at you first and took care of a lot of people. And then the cavalry would come in and they would basically mow down anybody that was left. And so that was a pretty good strategy, less organized than the Greeks. The Greeks were very organized, as I said earlier. But obviously, this worked very well because they got a huge empire out of it, as opposed to all the way to India, if you looked at the map back there. So it was pretty good. It worked very well. And I asked you to draw an immortal. And we took a break. Okay. So in 499 BC, after Cyrus dies. He does awesome building the empire, doing all that kind of stuff. And then we get a king named King Darius that we'll talk about in a second. 499 BCE, Persia and Greece kind of went to war against each other. And I'll tell you why I said kind of here in a second. But you can see the Greece in the orange and the Persian in green, and all the little city-states right there. So let's kind of talk about, this is what we call the Persian Wars, but let's talk about how it started. So we got this guy named Darius. After Cyrus, Cyrus the Great's son, unfortunately, dies, and Darius the First basically takes over. He's not related to them or anything like that. He just has a really good army, pretty much, and takes it over. He does very well as a leader. He organizes the empire into 20 different states, or provinces, as we said. He chooses loyal people as governors, or what we call satraps, for those 20 provinces. And he is able to rule over all of them fairly easily because the people that were loyal to him, the satraps, were making sure that taxes were collected, laws were done, and all that kind of stuff. So he does fairly well. He also makes roads for the Persian Empire. one specifically called the Royal Road, which kind of goes almost the whole entire way from the east to the west of the empire. And he makes a new capital city named Persepolis. So he does very well, very helpful to the Persians. But he is the one that goes to war against the Greeks. And here is why. In 499, as you can see, the Persian Empire is right here. And we have some Greek city-states in this place called Ionia right here. And in 499, the Persian Empire basically takes over these city-states in Ionia on the coast. And they don't like this, so they rebel against Darius. Even though he's doing all this great stuff, they don't like it. They don't like being told what to do, right? Democracy and all that kind of stuff, which we talked about before. And so he basically, Darius stops the rebellion, right? But he's super mad because specifically at Greece, over here on the other side, because Greece sends soldiers and weapons and all different kinds of stuff over to Ionia and the Greek city-states of Ionia. And Darius doesn't like that, because he said they're helping the enemy. They're helping, somebody that he doesn't want. They weren't even on his radar at this point. And so Darius was like, I'm going to get you back because you attacked, gave aid or help to these city-states. So he goes and attacks Greece at this little city, you can see it pointing it, called Marathon right there. So the Battle of Marathon, this is about 9 years later, because he had to deal with all the rebellions around the empire and stuff like that. But 9 years later, from 499, after this help of the Ionian city-states, 20,000 Persian soldiers sail to Greece to conquer this Marathon area and Athens and all that kind of stuff. And I asked you, who's going to win, all that. And you guys mostly said Persia because they had a larger army. Athenians only had about 11,000 at this point. So not very much. Here's how they won, though. The Greeks won because they surprise attacked the Persians. So literally the day after Athens gets there, or not Athens, Persia gets there in Marathon, the land army of the phalanxes I talked about earlier raced across this plain, this field in Marathon, and Persia is like, whoa, what are you doing? Because normally, in ancient times, this is going to sound weird, but normally you would wait until everybody's ready to go, and then you would attack, and it would be like a major battle. But the Greeks were like, no, we're not going to do that. We're just going to come the day after you get in and not even let you get settled in and just attack you. And that's what they did. And the Persians lost a ton of people, like 5,000 people. And so they were like, screw this, let's go back. And the Greeks only lost like 200. And so they won because they surprise attacked them, which is pretty good. And I'm not going to show you the video. You can look it up. It's on PBS. We watched it in class. So now there is a legend of the Battle of Marathon called the Legend of Phidippides. Phidippides is a Greek messenger. And after the Greeks won at Marathon, Phidippides basically runs back to Athens and is screaming Nike, Nike, which means victory in Greek. And that's where we get Nike, right? The Greek goddess of victory. And he goes all the way into the assembly of democracy, all the people, and basically gets there and then unfortunately dies because he ran all that way. Now, the measurement from Marathon to Athens is about 26 miles. And the run was pretty inspirational. And in that nowadays, we actually have an event, an Olympic event, and just for fun, in different cities and in the Olympics, called the Marathon, which is a little bit over 26 miles. And you run it in one straight thing. And it's not from Marathon to Athens. It's just called Marathon because that's where he was coming from. So pretty interesting that Phidippides was able to do that and continue his legacy through that way. Now, King Darius dies a couple years later. And unfortunately, he was not able to go and attack them again. His son Xerxes, though, was. And he was super mad that the Greeks basically humiliated or embarrassed Darius, his father Darius. So he was determined to get revenge on the Greeks, and so he started the Second Persian War about 10 years later after the First Persian War, 480 BCE. And I asked you, who's going to win this one, and most people said the Greeks, which we'll see in a second, was half true. But there's like two main battles that from this Second Persian War. The first one is the Battle of Thermopylae. Thermopylae is a pass, a mountain trail, a trail through the mountains, where the Persians were trying to get to Athens and just destroy Athens because that's who destroyed them. And kind of the difference between the first and the second one, it happens at Thermopylae. Instead of just being against Athens, now they're facing all of these city-states because they don't want to be taken over. The Persians were coming in from the north, not on the seas, so they were taking over a bunch of people. And all the city-states were like, no, we don't want this to happen. So let's join together and let's try to stop these people. Xerxes, on this mountain trail in Thermopylae, trying to get to Athens, had about 100,000 soldiers. The city-state of Sparta joined with other places like Argos and Thrace and all this different kind of city-states, massed about 1,400 soldiers. The Spartans had around 300. Everybody else kind of added to that as well. Again, this is from the movie 300. If you've ever seen it, it's very good. You should go kind of check it out. It is rated R, so make sure you ask your parents. But there are a couple of quotes from there that actually are relatively true. When Xerxes asked the Greeks to lay down their weapons, King Leonidas, who was of the Spartans, the general of the Spartans, said, come and get them. Xerxes had those immortal archers, and so he supposedly said, let the arrows blot out the sun, which theoretically they did, even though it really didn't, because that would be a lot of arrows. He didn't have that many. But yeah, those couple quotes from the movie are actually pretty good. So here's what happens. The Spartans held off the Persian invaders, about 100,000 people, because it was so narrow they couldn't pass them, right? They just had to go through them. And the Spartans and the others were so good at just like not letting them pass that they held them off for about 4-ish days. And unfortunately, there was a Greek trader who basically told the Persians about a goat trail. As you can see on the map, this little red line that they could go around the Spartans and the others. And they attacked them from behind, actually both sides, front and back, because you want to pretend like you're there. And so that ended up killing a lot, actually everybody at Thermopylae. So the Persians won the Battle of Thermopylae, but the war is not over yet. I did ask you about if there was something different, if the trader hadn't given away the secret mountain goat trail, then what would happen. And you guys predicted that probably that they would have standed a chance. Some of you guys said the Persians probably still won because they had more people, but pretty good. Almost done here. The second battle that's really, really important is called the Battle of Salamis. And I did ask how many Greeks do you think would be killed because of Xerxes the Persian. It's a lot. It's more than 200. I can tell you that. It's a lot, but there's not a lot of specifics of how many Greeks died. So I'm not going to take a guess. But in the Battle of Salamis, the Battle of Thermopylae, Persians win. They get all the way to Athens. Nobody's in Athens because the Athenians heard about the Battle of Thermopylae, 300, all that. And they were like, oh. And there was one guy that had an idea named Themistocles. He said, okay, let's get out of the city. Let's go to a port city or a city on the coast, and we'll draw the Persians there. Unfortunately, Athens is going to be empty, so they're going to destroy it, but that's okay. We can rebuild it. And that's what they did. Xerxes gets to Athens, burns it to the ground, Parthenon, everything like that. And then he finds that they're at Salamis, this port city, as you can see on the map I'm pointing to with this little arrow. And Xerxes was like, oh, we're totally going to take these over. It's done. Like, after we get these guys, everything else is ours. So he was so confident that he actually put his throne on top of a cliff/hill in Salamis so he could watch the defeat of the Greeks. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. Themistocles, like I said, the Athenian leader, basically knew that the waterways, the little water straits of Salamis were really narrow and small, and the Persian boats were really large, and the Athenian boats were really smaller than them, and they could maneuver through them pretty easily. And the Persians had a hard time going through these narrow ways, and so turning really slow and steering really bad. So the Greek triremes were able to ram them and sink them until they pretty much destroyed the whole entire Persian fleet, about 200 ships, and that's how they ended up winning. Xerxes is like, I'm done with this, and goes back to Persia. And I did ask you to put these in order, but they never attacked again. Persia never attacked Greece again. The Greece had basically said, we're the best. So they never did. But number one was Cyrus II built a strong army for Persia. The second one that happened was Darius I creating roads and satraps for Persia. The third thing was the Greeks defeat Persia at Marathon, then Thermopylae, and then finally Salamis. There is another battle that finishes the Persian Empire, or the Persian War, but I didn't go into that. It's called Plataea, but you can look that up on your own time. It's not as important as the other two. And that is the Persian Wars in a nutshell. So hopefully you were paying attention and all that kind of stuff.